My name is Eli Morgan, 29 years old from suburban New York. I always believed my Uncle Mark just walked away one night, vanished without a word. That's what my family told me, what the town accepted. But then a letter arrived. No return address, just a chilling message: he didn't run. Ask your mother about the basement. That was the moment everything I thought I knew about my family began to unravel, one secret, one lie, one buried truth at a time. Before we dive into this haunting true story of family betrayal and buried secrets, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what unfolds next, and as you listen, ask yourself, what would you do if the person you trusted most was hiding a deadly secret right beneath your feet? Now, let's begin. It was a Tuesday, gray skies, coffee gone cold, and bills in the mailbox. I had just gotten home from work, tossed my keys in the bowl by the door, and was sorting through the usual pile of junk: credit card offers, coupons for pizza I'd never order, and one envelope that stopped me cold: no stamp. No return address. Just my name, Eli Morgan, written in shaky block letters across the front. I flipped it over. Sealed with old glue, like it had been sitting in a drawer for years. Something about it felt off. I stood in the kitchen, heart ticking like a metronome, and opened it. One piece of paper, no date. No signature, just one line: they told you Mark ran. He didn't. Ask your mother what happened in the basement. My stomach dropped. I read it again, then again. Each time, the words hit harder: Mark, Uncle Mark, my dad's younger brother. He disappeared when I was 12, vanished after a supposed blow-up with my grandfather. The official story was that he left town in anger, cut ties with the family, couldn't handle the pressure. I remembered the flyers taped to lampposts. The quiet tension in the house. My parents' stiff smiles when I asked where he went. He needed space, they said. He'll come back when he's ready. But he never did, and after a while, we stopped asking. Now, nearly 16 years later, someone was telling me he didn't leave, he was silenced, and my mother knew what happened. I stared at the letter, my hands trembling. 100 memories started to crack open like ice beneath my feet: Mark teaching me how to ride a bike, sneaking me candy before dinner, letting me win at checkers. He wouldn't just walk away from that. From me. I didn't know who sent the letter, but one thing was clear: it wasn't a prank, it was a warning. And whoever sent it knew something the rest of us had buried. The house was quiet, but inside my chest, the silence had a weight. The kind that settles behind your ribs when the world tilts just enough to make you doubt everything. I grabbed my coat, stuffed the letter into my pocket, and walked out the door. My parents still lived in the same colonial-style house in Hartsdale. White shutters, red brick, and a perfectly manicured lawn. The kind of place where secrets shouldn't exist. But now, it felt like a stage set, one gust away from collapsing. As I pulled into their driveway, I didn't know what I was going to say. Or what I even hoped to hear. All I knew was the truth had waited long enough. And I wasn't going to wait anymore. The air inside my parents' house felt heavier than it had any right to. Same lavender-scented candle burning on the entry table. Same framed photo of our family vacation to Cape Cod. Everything looked like it always had, but I wasn't seeing any of it the same way. Mom was in the kitchen, humming as she wiped down the counter. She looked up, surprised to see me. Eli. What a nice surprise. Everything okay? I pulled out the letter and placed it on the kitchen island. Her smile faded the second she saw it. She didn't ask what it was, didn't touch it, just stared, hands frozen on the towel. I got this today, I said, keeping my voice steady. It says Uncle Mark didn't run away. It says you know what happened. In the basement. The silence was immediate and terrifying. She sat down slowly, her face going pale. Her eyes didn't meet mine. Where did you get it? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. No return address. Just one sentence. But it was enough. Still no eye contact. Mom, I said. What happened to Uncle Mark? She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She covered her mouth with both hands, like trying to hold back something too dangerous to let loose. Tears welled in her eyes, and then, she cracked. "I didn't know at first," she said, her voice breaking. "I swear to you, Eli, I didn't know. I didn't move." She took a shaky breath. "Your dad told me Mark left after an argument with your grandfather. That's what I believed. Until that night." "What night?" "The night I came home early from book club. You kids were asleep. Peter was in the basement. I remember hearing the washing machine running, and bleach. It was so strong, I could smell it from the top of the stairs." She finally looked at me, eyes red and raw. "He was scrubbing the floor. The wall. Like a man possessed." I swallowed hard. "And you didn't ask questions?" "I did." She shook her head. "He said there'd been a spill. Paint. But there was no paint can. No brushes. Just emptiness." "And you believe that?" "No," she whispered. "But I was scared. Of what I'd find out. Of what it would mean for all of us." "You were 12. Rachel had just started second grade. I told myself it was nothing. That I was imagining things." "But you weren't," I said, voice hollow. She covered her face. "I don't know what happened to Mark. But I know your father lied about it. And I let it happen." The house was quiet again, except this time, the silence wasn't normal. It was a weight that filled every room. A silence built on years of denial, of fear, of something far worse. "I have to know the truth," I said. Mom didn't stop me, she just nodded, like she knew the time for secrets was finally over. Mom didn't sleep that night. I stayed on the couch, replaying every word she said over and over. Around 2 a.m., I heard her pacing upstairs, soft footsteps like a heartbeat echoing through the floor. The weight of the letter was still in my pocket. By morning, she was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her coffee like it had answers. "I remember more," she said, her voice raspy. "From that night." I sat down across from her, my own mug untouched. "I told you about the bleach," she said. "But there's something else. Something I didn't let myself think about until now." She looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen since I was a kid. "Fear. Your father had this old red toolbox he kept under the workbench," she continued. "Tools Mark gave him when we first moved in. A full set, screwdrivers, socket wrenches, everything." I nodded. I remembered that toolbox. Mark had engraved Peter's initials into the side with a soldering iron. "I used to trace them with my fingers." The day after Mark disappeared, she said slowly, "that toolbox was gone. Gone. Replaced," she said. "With a new one. Still red, still Craftsman, but new. No initials. Just showed up like nothing happened." I asked him about it, and he told me he accidentally left the old one at the hardware store. Said someone must have stolen it. I clenched my jaw. "But you didn't believe him?" She shook her head. "Not after the bleach. Not after the silence." A sharp chill ran up my spine. She got up, walked over to the pantry, and pulled down a photo album. She flipped through the pages until she landed on one with a picture of Mark and Dad, standing next to that very toolbox. Both of them were smiling. I could see the initials burned into the side of the metal lid. "MPM, I said quietly. "Mark Paul Morgan." My father had taken the name off the tools, off the wall, off the house. But he couldn't erase it from the past. He wanted to erase him, Mom said softly. Piece by piece. My hands trembled as I closed the album. This wasn't just about a disappearance anymore. This was about a man deliberately cleaning away his brother's memory. The basement had been scrubbed, the tools swapped, the story told and retold until it settled like dust on a shelf. But dust can be blown away. "I need to go back to the old house," I said. "The one we moved out of after he disappeared. Eli. I need to see what's still down there. If there's anything. She hesitated, then nodded. Just. Be careful. She didn't say it, but I could feel what she meant. If Peter really did something that night, if Mark never left, then I was about to walk straight into the truth we were never meant to find, and whatever was waiting in that basement hadn't seen daylight in 16 years. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the old red toolbox, the initials burned into it, the bleach on the basement floor. The way Mom's voice cracked when she admitted the truth she'd buried for years, I knew I couldn't do this alone. So I called someone. His name was Cal O'Leary, a former NYPD detective turned private investigator who operated out of a cramped office above a locksmith's shop in Yonkers. He was blunt, sharp-eyed, and didn't blink when I told him why I needed him. I think my father killed his brother, I said. 16 years ago. In our basement. Cal leaned back in his chair, arms folded. That's not the wildest thing I've heard this week. He didn't ask why I wasn't going to the cops, not yet. He understood the kind of thing that eats families alive from the inside. Secrets. Especially the old ones. We drove out to the house in Hartsdale together the next afternoon. It hadn't changed much. Still the same pale blue siding, the same cracked driveway where I used to ride my bike in circles. The people who bought it from my parents were an older couple who split their time between here and the Carolinas. Lucky for us, the place was currently empty and listed for seasonal rental. Cal had a way of making things happen. 20 minutes and one smooth phone call later, we had permission to inspect for foundation issues. The moment we stepped into the basement, I felt it, the chill, not from the temperature. From the memories, the air was still musty. The overhead bulbs flickered the same way I remembered as a kid. It was all there, the workbench, the storage shelves. And the back wall, made of concrete, patched in one section with drywall that didn't match. Cal walked slowly, tapping along the walls with the handle of a screwdriver. Thump, thump, thump. Hollow. He stopped. This part's newer. He said. Drywall's less than 20 years old, maybe even less than 15. That's not consistent with the rest of the foundation. He ran his fingers along the seam where the drywall met the original concrete. Your father put this up himself, didn't he? I nodded. He pulled out a small scope camera from his bag. Drilled a tiny hole just above the baseboard. Fed the cord in, then he went silent. I looked over his shoulder at the screen. It was dark, except for the faint outline of something. A large, rectangular object. Covered in plastic. The corner of what looked like leather or maybe fabric. My pulse thudded in my ears. You see that? Cal whispered. That's not insulation. That's storage. Someone hid something back there. He turned to me, jaw tight. You still want the truth? I didn't hesitate. Tear it open. Because whatever was behind that wall had been waiting far too long, and I had waited long enough. The sound of the crowbar biting into drywall echoed like thunder in the quiet basement. Each splintered crack made my chest tighten. Cal worked methodically, slicing through the seams with a utility knife. Then wedging the crowbar behind the boards. I stood frozen, hands and fists at my sides, breathing through my nose to keep the nausea down. The wall gave way with a final groan, and the panel fell forward, dust rising in a thick, gray cloud. Behind it was a space no more than 3 feet deep, a crude cavity carved into the foundation. And inside it, wrapped in several layers of plastic sheeting and duct tape, was a trunk, black. Rusted. The kind you see in war movies. Cal didn't speak. He just looked at me, as if asking one more time if I was sure. I nodded. He cut through the plastic. The scent hit first, a sickening mix of mildew, decay, and something sweetly metallic. I gagged and turned away. Covering my mouth, he opened the lid. Inside was what I feared, and what I already knew in my bones, remains. Partial, but unmistakable. Bones, curled into unnatural angles, still wrapped in the shreds of a dark green hoodie. I remembered that hoodie. Mark wore it all the time, the sleeves frayed at the cuffs, a Yankees logo just barely visible through the grime, but it wasn't the bones that did it, it was the watch, still ticking, a silver-faced timepiece with a cracked leather strap. A gift I gave Uncle Mark for his birthday the year before he disappeared. I saved up 3 months of allowance to buy it. The back was engraved with his initials, MPM. Cal crouched beside the trunk and pulled on gloves. He lifted the watch carefully, holding it out so I could see. "You sure?" I nodded, voice lost to the lump in my throat. "Yeah. That's his." He exhaled slowly. "We need to call the police." I just stared into the trunk. 16 years of questions collapsed into this one horrible moment. The thing we all pretended didn't happen had been sealed behind drywall and silence, waiting. Waiting for someone to care enough to dig. Mark hadn't left, he'd been left behind. And my father had lied every single day since. When the police arrived, I sat on the basement steps, head in my hands as officers swarmed the scene. Evidence bags. Flash photography. Muffled voices calling out to each other in clipped, urgent tones. One of the detectives pulled me aside. "This is a homicide investigation now. We'll need to speak with your parents." I just nodded. There was no more doubt, no more pretending. The truth had been pulled from the wall, and it had a name, Mark Morgan, and he never ran. He was silenced, by someone who shared his blood. They came for my father at dawn. 3 squad cars pulled into my parents' driveway just as the sun started bleeding through the treetops. I watched from across the street in my parked car, engine idling, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. No sirens. No shouting. Just the calm precision of practiced law enforcement and a man who already knew he'd been caught. Peter Morgan didn't struggle. He didn't even look surprised. Just opened the front door in his robe, nodded at the officers, and let them cuff him without a word. My mother stood behind him, trembling, one hand over her mouth. Her eyes found me across the street, but I couldn't hold the gaze. I drove away before they could put him in the cruiser. Word spread through Hartsdale like wildfire. By lunchtime, every deli, barbershop, and school hallway was buzzing. Peter Morgan, the man who fixed everyone's leaky faucets, donated to the church bake sales, and once pulled a kid out of a frozen lake during winter break, had been arrested for murder, for murdering his own brother. It didn't take long for the whispers to start turning toward me. At Connie's diner, I heard my name said in the same breath as traitor. At Doyle's Hardware, where Dad had worked for 20 years, the cashier looked at me like I'd punched a nun. Friends I'd known since middle school crossed the street when they saw me coming. Some just stared, mouths tight, eyes full of pity, or worse, suspicion. One man stopped me outside the post office and said, "You should have left well enough alone. You've destroyed your family." I wanted to scream, "No, Dad destroyed our family, all I did was uncover what he buried," but in small towns like this, people would rather believe in a lie that makes them comfortable than face a truth that makes them afraid. I became the rupture. The reminder that evil can hide behind the most familiar faces. That sometimes, it's not strangers you should fear, it's the ones who sit across from you at Thanksgiving dinner. Rachel called me that night. "You couldn't just let it go?" she asked. Voice cold. "After all this time?" "He killed Mark," I said. "Our uncle." "He was your uncle," she snapped. "He was barely around for me." I didn't answer. Because I knew what that really meant. She wasn't angry about Mark. She was angry about the fallout. The shame. The headlines. The broken illusion of a perfect family. "Don't call me again," she said before hanging up. I sat on my apartment floor afterward, lights off, the only sound coming from the ticking of the wall clock. I wondered if this was what Mark felt in his final hours, alone, betrayed, silenced. But I wasn't going to be silenced, not anymore. I didn't care how many people turned on me. I didn't care who whispered. I knew what I found in that wall, and I knew who put it there. The town could believe what it wanted. The truth didn't need their permission to exist. The courtroom smelled like old wood and something colder, like secrets left to rot too long. Every morning for 3 weeks, I walked past the courthouse steps in White Plains, past the reporters, the spectators, and the people who used to be neighbors but now couldn't look me in the eye. Peter Morgan v. The people of the state of New York. The name didn't seem real anymore. Not after what we found behind the wall. Not after the forensics confirmed that the remains belonged to my Uncle Mark. Not after my father said nothing, not one word, to deny it. He sat at the defense table like a statue carved out of guilt. Stone-faced. Calm. He wore the same gray suit every day. Never looked at me. Never looked at my mother. When the prosecution laid out the timeline, Mark's disappearance, the bleach, the hidden cavity in the basement, he just stared forward, as if the truth didn't apply to him. The watch was introduced as Exhibit C, Mark's watch. My gift. Still ticking, it was placed carefully on a velvet cushion for the jury to see. Some of them flinched when they heard it ticking. Why hide a body, the prosecutor asked, unless you know you're guilty? No one answered. Not even my father. The defense tried to spin it. Claimed Mark may have died in a fight gone wrong. That Peter panicked. That he buried the body out of fear. No intent. Just a tragic accident. But the trunk, the bleach, the missing toolbox, it painted a different picture. One of control. Of cold planning, and worst of all, silence. They called me to testify. I stood before the jury and told them about the letter. About the basement. About the day we tore through the wall and found what should have never been hidden. Every word I said, I watched for some flicker of regret in his eyes. A flinch. A twitch. Anything, but Peter Morgan stared through me like I was a stranger on the street. When Mom took the stand, her voice cracked before she even began. She admitted what she saw. The bleach. The new tools. The fear. She didn't defend him, not this time. When she stepped down, she didn't return to the gallery. She walked right out the door. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict came back swift and clear. Guilty, second-degree murder. Tampering with evidence. Concealment of human remains. The courtroom was silent when the judge read the sentence, 30 years to life. My father blinked once, then nothing. As the bailiff led him away, he finally turned his head, not to the jury, not to the judge, to me. Our eyes locked for the briefest moment. I searched for something, regret, apology, fear, but all I saw was emptiness, a void where my father used to be. The trial was over, but the damage he left behind, that had only begun. The house on Elmwood felt smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the weight of what we knew now, or maybe it was just time collapsing in on itself. The new owners had replaced the shutters and repainted the siding, but the bones of the place were the same cracked walkway, same pine tree leaning toward the garage like it still had secrets to whisper. I came alone, a small wooden plaque tucked under my arm, Mark Morgan, brother. Uncle. Truth teller. You deserved better. I didn't ask for permission. The owners were rarely home, and even if they were, I wasn't here to trespass, I was here to remember. They called me to testify. I stood before the jury and told them about the letter. About the basement. About the day we tore through the wall and found what should have never been hidden. Every word I said, I watched for some flicker of regret in his eyes. A flinch. A twitch. Anything, but Peter Morgan stared through me like I was a stranger on the street. When Mom took the stand, her voice cracked before she even began. She admitted what she saw. The bleach. The new tools. The fear. She didn't defend him, not this time. When she stepped down, she didn't return to the gallery. She walked right out the door. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict came back swift and clear. Guilty, second-degree murder. Tampering with evidence. Concealment of human remains. The courtroom was silent when the judge read the sentence, 30 years to life. My father blinked once, then nothing. As the bailiff led him away, he finally turned his head, not to the jury, not to the judge, to me. Our eyes locked for the briefest moment. I searched for something, regret, apology, fear, but all I saw was emptiness, a void where my father used to be. The trial was over, but the damage he left behind, that had only begun. The house on Elmwood felt smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the weight of what we knew now, or maybe it was just time collapsing in on itself. The new owners had replaced the shutters and repainted the siding, but the bones of the place were the same cracked walkway, same pine tree leaning toward the garage like it still had secrets to whisper. I came alone, a small wooden plaque tucked under my arm, Mark Morgan, brother. Uncle. Truth teller. You deserved better. I didn't ask for permission. The owners were rarely home, and even if they were, I wasn't here to trespass, I was here to remember. We stood there in silence for a long time, the evening light casting long shadows across the lawn, not healed, not yet, but no longer pretending. When we finally walked away, we didn't go in opposite directions, we left together, not as siblings with a past behind them, but as two people finally facing it, side by side. There's a quiet that settles after the storm. Not peace exactly, but something like it. I stood on the curb across from our old house, watching the morning light stretch over the roof. The garage door where we left Mark's plaque caught the sun just right. The name, once hidden behind drywall and silence, now gleamed in the open air, Mark Morgan. I whispered it under my breath like a prayer. Like a promise. There's still a hole in me, carved out by what my father did, by what we lost. But I've learned something since the trial, since the headlines faded and the neighbors stopped pretending to care. Truth has a cost. It cost me the father I thought I had. It cost me friends, peace, normalcy. My mother barely leaves her condo now. Rachel and I are slowly mending something that probably won't ever be whole again, but truth also gave something back. It gave Mark his name. His place in our story, and it gave me freedom from the lie we were all raised in. The town doesn't look at me the same. Some people still think I should have stayed quiet. That I ripped apart a family and embarrassed the name that once meant something in Hartsdale. But names don't mean much if they're built on silence, and I won't carry my father's shadow anymore. I think that's what healing is, choosing not to pretend. Letting the wound air out, even when it stings. Every year now, on the anniversary of Mark's disappearance, Rachel and I come back here. We bring sunflowers, his favorite. We sit on the garage step, just like we used to when we were kids. We don't say much. Sometimes silence is just silence, not a weapon, not a cover, just space for remembering. This year, I brought my own son with me. He's only 5, still too young to understand, but I want him to grow up in truth. Not illusion. Not fear. I want him to know that secrets don't make you strong, facing them does. As we left the house that day, I turned back one last time. The wind picked up, rustling the plaque against the garage. I imagined Mark sitting there beside it, legs stretched out, smiling that crooked grin he always had. He was never meant to be buried in silence, and now, he's not. There are things you can bury, bones, memories, guilt. But the truth? The truth waits, sometimes behind walls. Sometimes inside letters, sometimes in the eyes of the people who refuse to stop asking, and when it's finally uncovered, it changes everything. It ruins what was never real, but it can also grow something better in its place. What cannot be buried becomes the root of something new. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that the truth, no matter how painful, can set you free. And if you've ever uncovered a dark family secret or had to choose between silence and justice, I want to hear your story in the comments below.